Welcome back. Fired up. President Biden delivered his annual State of the Union address last night, and it was nothing short of intense.
Down, we get back up. We keep going. That's America.
From heckling to clapping back, we'll talk about what President Biden discussed, how he did, and how this sets things up for the 2024 election. Plus, we'll talk about Senator Katie Britt's rebuttal to President Biden's address. We'll talk about all the things she discussed, how she did, and what to expect from her going forward. We'll be taking a look at those stories and more today, March 8th, 2024. From Ishan Media, this is the Ishan S. Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics, with me, your host, Ishan. Welcome back to the Ishan S. Show. I know I've been gone for a while, and that kind of did, that weird, unplanned, but unpredictable hiatus thing. I know I did it again, guys, but I'm back, and we just had the State of the Union last night, my favorite day of the political calendar, other than Election Day, of course. I love the State of the Union address, because it is one of those things where you have the entire federal government in one room. You have the president, you have the vice president, the speaker, senators, house members, literally everybody important is in the same room, and we're all talking about the agenda for the next year. Whether or not they follow up on it is a different discussion, but it's a sight to see. And last night we just had the last State of the Union of this presidential term, and it was a sight to see. I know I said that last year in last year's episode because I was listening to the episode I made about this last year, and I know I said it then, but really, I mean it this time. Like, this time, it was really a sight to see. Because this is important, you have to understand. 34 weeks and 242 days out from November 5th, this is the biggest audience President Biden is going to get before the election. It doesn't, the conventions will happen, the debates might happen, but this is probably the biggest stage where he will get it to himself. So it's high stakes. Some goals that I think the Biden administration has set out was don't mess up, seem strong, and clap back at the Republican hecklers. We'll talk about that in a second, but he did well. Just some general feelings just from the day. I think he did well, and I think Biden did favors for himself with that State of the Union address that he just had. I think it represents something nice for President Biden, and I'm not here just to praise him because I will have my criticisms, but because he was in the spotlight, there was a lot of expectations that the press had set for him. A lot of it was drawn from Donald Trump. Donald Trump was kind of setting these expectations that Joe Biden is this old, senile old man and that he's going to mess up. So the expectations were set so low for Biden, he outperformed the outperformance. And I think it was really good. It was a nice, good address. And I think part of what we saw as being good about this is that he was able to meet in the moment. He was able to respond to things. He was able to clap back. And that, I think that should shut down at least some of the complaints that some people may have of his ability and capacity to respond in real time. He was able to do that, and he handled that pretty well. Like an example, for example, as soon as he enters into the House chamber, Marjorie Taylor Greene is waiting for him, and the expression he made was a sight to see. Go look it up. It was hilarious, and it's honestly how anybody might react if you see somebody in complete MAGA hats and outfits just standing there waiting for you. But it was funny, and she basically ambushed him and was trying to tell him to do something. I'll talk about that as well in a second. But it's like those types of moments where he was able to meet it. And it's become such a theatric, the State of the Union address. It is my favorite, non-election day on the political calendar. But it's like sad that it's become such a theater thing. Like it's become this thing where everybody wants to be a celebrity. Everyone wants to put on a show. So it's kind of like, whatever. But that is what it's becoming, and I think Biden was able to meet that moment, and he's set a precedent for how you are to handle it. But of course, that's just my beginning thoughts. We'll go more into my actual feelings about it after we go through the speech. So let's start with number one in terms of the points that I'm setting out. Number one, Joe Biden started off, opened the speech about freedom and democracy under threat. Interesting way to start. I would say that it was one of those types of moves where I think it made sense. The democracy under threat part was not necessarily at home. It was about the rest of the world. So he emphasized this issue of Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and was criticizing Republican lawmakers for not passing the Ukraine aid bill that was put through Congress, and it was a direct criticism of the people around him. And I think it was an interesting way to start off the night. He started and opened talking about Ukraine. And I think because it just matters so much, let's give a quick update on where the situation is in Ukraine. Right now, they're not doing so hot. And it's not because they're technically losing on their own grounds. It's that they just don't have the supplies to keep fighting back. They are more than capable of fighting back. It's just they don't have access to the resources they need. And so the Biden administration's reasoning is that we ought to send them more weapons and more, ammunition to help them keep fighting the Russians off. And so that was what Joe Biden was saying. He was saying that I would rather put in all this money now rather than putting soldiers, no boots on the ground. So he really went right in, and started talking about Ukraine. But where I think, honestly, and this is a theme for the rest of the night, where I think he really hit it, was when he criticized former President Donald Trump for his stance towards Russian President Vladimir Putin. It's interesting because he did not mention Trump by name. And we knew this going in, that he was going to somehow invoke Donald Trump, but we knew that he wasn't going to do it by name. The way he did it in this speech, though, it was a lot more direct than I think anyone would have realized. And he directly called him out. He said that Trump, he had this contrast with Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, saying one Republican president, Ronald Reagan, fought against the Russians, saying, "Tear this wall down," the famous line. And then he quoted Trump, who a few weeks ago literally did say he's going to let Putin do whatever the hell he wants. And that's problematic in its own right, but it was a very effective, I would say, tool in terms of communication. I thought it was really well put, that criticism of Donald Trump. And it was not the first time. He went on to invoke Trump 13 times throughout that speech, not referring to him by name, but by saying, "My predecessor this, my predecessor that." And he labeled Trump's approach in this case with Ukraine as outrageous and dangerous. So interesting way to start things off. Fiery opening, feisty opening. So here's a clip of President Biden criticizing Trump for his comments on Putin and Ukraine.
Putin of Russia is on the march, invading Ukraine and sowing chaos throughout Europe and beyond. If anybody in this room thinks Putin will stop at Ukraine, I assure you he will not. Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." That's a quote. A former president actually said that, bowing down to a Russian leader. I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable.
So President Biden opened by talking about democracy around the world, and then he transitioned to then talking about democracy here at home. And so he started talking about January 6th. He reminded everybody in the audience that most of them were there for the insurrection that happened on January 6th back in 2021. We've talked about it so many times here on this show, but he reminded the audience, again, like, you guys were literally here, and there's this attack on democracy going on. It's true that it is happening, and he said that he very boldly said that it's the gravest threat to democracy, what happened on January 6th, since the Civil War. I thought that was pretty bold to say, but he said it. He said that the people that stormed the Capitol were not patriots, and called out people for telling January 6th lies. And there is, and I feel like for the first two, and remember, January 6th happened 2 weeks before Biden took office. So this has been basically his entire term. And for the first few years of this term, we've seen Republicans, a lot of them say, oh, it's not a good thing. Oh, yeah, that was so sad what happened that day. The violence was bad. Oh, now we're starting to see a shift in tone. And that shift in tone is coming from mainly the MAGA wing, not even the entire MAGA wing, the far parts of the MAGA wing that say that it was not an insurrection, that it was a peaceful day. I know there were some people that have been saying it. Former President Donald Trump right at the top. He never said anything bad. But it's just the shift in tone that has been going on has indicated this weird move on the Republicans' part to pretend like nothing happened, or it's just a collective amnesia. I'm going to go with the first option, because if it's the other option, that's a bigger issue. But it's like they're using language like the January 6th hostages, about people that were trespassing and being violent that have been put in jail for it. So it's this type of rhetoric that's been going around that I think Biden, wanted to call out, and I think he did so effectively. And I think he said one really key line that I liked, that he said, "You can't love your country only when you win." And I thought that was a very stark line to say, but it was one that, I think is worth saying, because honestly, yeah, that's true. You cannot love this country only when you win. You have to love this country all the time. And you can't just love it when you hate it when you lose, or love it when you win. And so I think that message that he was trying to go about, it was an effective delivery of that. So here, take a listen to Joe Biden's January 6th comments.
History is watching, just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th. When insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you were here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed a gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War. But they failed. The threat to democracy must be defended. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th. I will not do that. This is the moment to speak the truth and to bury the lies. Here's the simple truth. You can't love your country only when you win.
So after that talk about January 6th, we move to another big part of President Biden's term, which is about reproductive freedom. And this was a discussion that I think has become more prominent since the 2023 elections that we had. And I say that because he talked about how abortion has become a losing issue for Republicans. Admit it or not, if you're listening, it is a losing issue for the Republican Party now. Abortion and reproductive freedom in general is just not something that they can win on anymore. And it shows, because we're seeing election after election, Democrats are able to campaign on abortion, and it's working for them. It's working for them in a way that I just think, take, for example, the IVF decision that just came out from the Alabama Supreme Court. I would have covered it if I was here, but there was that Alabama decision that came out where they basically said that the cells that you're working with, the embryonic cells that you work with, are not they didn't classify them as children under the law, but they said that if they are damaged, you are charged with it as if you were to have hurt a minor or killed a minor. And that in itself has its own substance of debate, but what resulted from it was a lot of IVF care facilities across Alabama shutting down because they want to avoid liability, because they want to avoid these they don't have protections. So last night, the Alabama legislature passed a bill, or maybe a few nights ago, passed a bill to protect IVF in their state, to bring back IVF care, because then the Alabamans were facing a lot of pushback because of the fact that, honestly, it's a losing issue. So, they already lost abortion. They didn't want to lose IVF after that. So that was definitely in our collective memory, because it wasn't that long ago. So, and President Biden, when he was talking about it, he brought it all back to Roe v. Wade being overturned with the Dobbs decision, and he started to criticize the justices in a way where he said, I don't mean any offense to you guys, but the women of America are going to vote, and they're going to show their electoral power, which I thought was a nice line to say. Rhetorically, it was pretty effective, and I think it delivered on this idea that the women of America that have been voting Democrat are upset not because of a wide array of policies, but by one specific issue, and that was what the justices did. So, and he said that directly to them. Everyone around them is applauding, and they're just looking at him, and they're not doing anything. Because, of course, they're supposed to be apolitical. We're not sure how good that is, but technically they are supposed to. So here's a clip of President Biden talking about abortion.
Those bragging about overturning Roe v. Wade have no clue about the power of women. But they found out when reproductive freedom was on the ballot. We won in 2022 and 2020, and we'll win again in 2024.
So First Lady Jill Biden brought a couple of guests to the State of the Union as we stick to this topic of reproductive health care. And so two of the guests were Latoya Beasley and Kate Cox. So Latoya Beasley is a Alabama woman who was in the process of IVF, and she was then denied those services after the Alabama ruling because her healthcare provider was no longer going to be practicing that IVF procedure due to the fact that they risked facing all this liability, so they canceled the process for her. And so it's harmed her, and he wanted to show how this decision that came as a result of Roe v. Wade was now prompting more decisions that were hurting more women across America in their reproductive freedom. And then he also talked about Kate Cox, a Texas woman who couldn't get an abortion when she needed one for her own well-being because her pregnancy was going to be fatal. Her child was not going to be viable beyond the womb, and she herself was facing a lot of risks and dangers with carrying that pregnancy. Texas's laws, as a result of Roe v. Wade, were very strict and stringent, and so she couldn't get the emergency care she needed, and she had to leave the state. And again, Biden brought that up to point out that this is what this decision has done. And criticizing the justices, looking right at them as he said it, it showed that this is the type of campaigner he's going to be. He's going to go right at it. He's going to point. He's going to show the world. He wants to show the world that this is the issue that Democrats have. And if Republicans want to win in elections, they have to master this issue of abortion that has become for them. Like they are not winning right now. And look at the polls. Look at the results. They are losing across the board as a result of this issue. But moving on, I want to talk about now the border and talk about the defined tone and the heckling, because there was a lot of heckling last night, but the most heckling that I saw was during the border discussion. And specifically, we talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene at the top of the episode, and let me tell you why I brought her up. So Marjorie Taylor Greene ambushes Joe Biden and gives him a button, and it says the name, and that name is Laken Riley. Laken Riley was a Georgia nursing student who was murdered by an undocumented immigrant, and it sparked it's a tragedy that happened, and it sparked a lot of outrage. In fact, the House, I think earlier yesterday, just passed a resolution regarding her, and there's a lot of chatter among conservative circles that there wasn't enough of her name being said. There wasn't enough of this issue. And some Republicans were trying to take this story and pin it on Democrats, accusing them of allowing this to happen as a result of their border policies. And so she gave Biden the button, and Biden took it with him. And while he's talking about the border, criticizing Republicans for not passing the border deal that they helped, craft and negotiate, Marjorie Taylor Greene started screaming out to say her name, and Biden, off script, completely took on and said her name and said it was a tragedy. And then he said, we could avoid this because we could have had a good border policy. And honestly, it's so sad that this happened. It's so sad that this happened. And it's a tragedy because Democrats can't admit it, but there is a crisis at the border. And it came as a result of policy decisions made. That is on them. Where I think the blame shifts is Democrats came to the negotiating table and brokered a deal with Republicans. But Trump then said not to pass this deal because, I'm not even joking, he literally admitted to this, that it would help Joe Biden in the next election. That's crazy to me. And so this tragedy that happened, while awful, is something that could be exacerbated by the lack of action if politics is going to guide border policy the way it has been right now. And so I feel Biden was able to effectively respond and address and say her name as he should. But he also called out the other side for not playing their end of the bargain and supporting a bill that, again, they helped negotiate. So here is President Biden, a clip of President Biden talking about the border deal that ultimately failed.
In November, my team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh? That conservatives got together and said it was a good bill? I'll be darned. That's amazing. That bipartisan bill would hire 1,500 more security agents and officers, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backload of 2 million cases, 4,300 more asylum officers, and new policies so they can resolve cases in 6 months instead of 6 years now.
President Biden then shifted to some more grim topics and talked about the Israel-Gaza conflict. Obviously, as you know, it's taken a huge human toll, and there's a lot of death and destruction that's going on in Gaza as a result of the response that Israel has had to the horrific October 7th attack. In recent days, Kamala Harris has called for a ceasefire, so she became the highest-ranking member of the administration to openly call for a ceasefire. She met with Benny Gantz, the wartime Minister of Defense of Israel, to talk about that plan, and it's being brokered right now. It's fallen through a couple of times, but they're still brokering it. And the Biden administration is looking to negotiate a 6-week ceasefire, stopping the fighting and trying to get more humanitarian aid in. So President Biden announced that they are the military would be building a temporary pier or port to bring in more humanitarian aid into Gaza. So it's, I think, an important discussion that needs to be had, particularly for young people and for Muslim Americans and Arab Americans who feel particularly strongly about this. People who have lost dozens of family members as a result of all of the fighting back that has happened, many of whom are not Hamas. Obviously, Israel has said they want to obliterate Hamas, but in this, they have also taken the lives of so many innocents. And I think that's where President Biden is now starting to draw the line, I think. So he did call out the Netanyahu government and said that they do have a responsibility to maintain and preserve human rights. So here is President Biden calling out the Netanyahu government.
Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire. And they're announcing they're going to have a crossing in northern Gaza. To the leadership of Israel, I say this: humanitarian assistance cannot be a secondary consideration or a bargaining chip. Protecting and saving innocent lives has to be a priority. As we look to the future, the only real solution to the situation is a two-state solution over time.
Honestly, a tragedy. And I think it's good on President Biden's part, if I were to look at this from a political lens, just talking about how to get the geopolitical pressure to stop the bloodshed. I would say that calling out Netanyahu's government in this way is an effective way at actually trying to get something done about this and trying to get something done. So I think it's something that can definitely be explored further. But after that, President Biden started talking about his age towards the end. He delivered that assertive speech. I mean, let's just say for a second that this 81-year-old guy that everyone calls senile stood there for an hour and 6 minutes talking energetic and engaging with a pretty rowdy crowd, if you can be honest about that. And he's joked like, yeah, I'm old, but the other guy, his ideas are old. He's talked about how he's a forward-looking president. I read somewhere that he said the word future like 20 times in his speech. He's trying to market himself as a forward-looking president and also trying to label his opponent, as old as him, but more archaic in thought. And it's an interesting take on how he should be going about this age issue, because age is an issue for Democrats and Republicans and independent voters. Across the board, a lot of people think Joe Biden's old. And he said he's playing into it. And I think that was a good move on his part. Yeah, play into it. I'll play into it. He's saying, yeah, I'm old. So what? My opponent, his ideas are. He's as old as I am. But I'm looking forward. He looks back. And I think that is something that is worth talking about. And it's all about the contrast to Donald Trump. It was all about the contrast, including the other 12 times that he mentioned my predecessor. He then ended the speech. He was there for about 40 minutes, chatting with members of Congress, shaking hands, talking to people. And that was the State of the Union address. Here's how he closed. In terms of closing remarks, presidents always say the State of the Union is so strong. So here is a clip of President Biden saying that.
Down, we get back up. We keep going. That's America. That's you, the American people. It's because of you America's coming back. It's because of you our future is brighter. It's because of you that tonight we can proudly say the state of our union is strong and getting stronger.
So with that State of the Union, to Biden's credit, it was a good speech. This is what he needed. Like, he needed this to go well. Going in, I think a lot of people were thinking, okay, he's old. He can't really do that well. And he ended up the way somebody said it on Fox News, I think, was he underpromised and over-delivered. And I like that line so much because the Trump, honestly, it was the Trump campaign that set expectations so low that became self-sabotage, because Biden, as long as he was standing at the podium, he was beating all expectations, but he was doing good and he was doing better than a lot of people. And obviously, there was the heckling that was going on, and it's honestly embarrassing that has to happen. But I think it represents a change in our culture, political culture, where this is now going to be acceptable. And I think presidents in the future are going to have to go in with the assumption that this is going to happen to them. No changing that. It's fine. But yeah, so it's happening. I think it went well, and in a time where people are nervous about his age and competence, he proved that he's more than capable of taking on that mantle. And I think Trump said that he would live truth. He would send out, the truth, social truths. But honestly, and he said he would be doing a play-by-play rebuttal. But honestly, I don't think anybody cared, because nobody talked about Donald Trump as in, like, Donald Trump, what he's doing right now. For the first time, I felt like the conversation was about Joe Biden. And no one cared what Donald Trump was saying, which is a pretty stark change. Yes, we talked about how Joe Biden mentioned Trump by name, or not by name and everything, and rebutted him. Obviously, he's his opponent in the general election. But the discussion was not about Donald Trump and what he was saying and what he was doing and what he was thinking in the way that it traditionally has been for 8 years now. It was different. And I think it shows. It shows a change in maybe the direction in which this is going. A CNN flash poll gave Biden a 62%, which I think isn't as good as the 72% that he had last year, but it was mainly criticized for moments like where he called an undocumented immigrant an illegal, things like that, and the coughing from time to time. But it's like pretty good score, I would say, for a State of the Union. But then, of course, as we have every State of the Union address, we also have the rebuttal to the State of the Union address. And longtime viewers know how I feel about this honor. I say it's prestigious. People like Nikki Haley, Gretchen Whitmer, Marco Rubio, Stacey Abrams, Bombi Jindal, they were selected to do this. And the idea behind it is that, the way I see it, is that you are so significant in your party that the higher-ups decided that your face is the right face to put on the screens of every American watch the president's State of the Union address. Your face is what we should be putting on their screens. And I don't know. That's just my thing. It's like, I always thought that it was like this honorable, exciting thing. Now, for all the things that it's good with, I just feel like they're usually remembered for the wrong things. Like, take, for example, when Marco Rubio did it, he had the water thing where he awkwardly was drinking water in the middle of his speech. Just a 10-second pause. Drink water, just so... it was random, and I don't know. But Katie Britt is the senator from Alabama, junior senator from Alabama. So she was selected to deliver it. And in terms of, I think, her performance, I feel she didn't do a great job. Obviously, it's a tough thing to do. And usually you are rebutting everything the president said. So you have to be quick on your feet. You have to be able to craft up something. And I just feel like she didn't do that great. I don't know. So the setting was at a dinner table in her kitchen, actually filmed at her own house. The choice of a kitchen as the backdrop was an interesting choice. I think there was a contrast element to this, where they had President Biden, an 81-year-old man, delivering the presidential State of the Union address, and they wanted to contrast that to a 40-year-old mother, who is Senator Britt. They did the same thing last year with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor of Arkansas, but Britt was trying to pose that contrast. So I just thought, and you're smart enough to put it together, but I just thought that setting a kitchen as the backdrop for that might have not been the most appropriate in terms of when it comes to trying to start that, push that message. But whatever. A lot of viewers, some of them found it relatable, and others considered it a little gimmicky. But in terms of the actual substance of her speech, I think Britt really tried hard to connect with everyday Americans. She was trying to talk about how she faces the same issues as, trying to be one of the Republican leaders, saying, like, I understand your issues, I understand what you're saying, and we have to work together to try to fix this, but I understand it. The Democrats don't. That was what she was going for. So here is a compilation of some of the interesting moments from Britt's speech.
Saul was the performance of a permanent politician who has actually been in office for longer than I've been alive. The American dream has turned into a nightmare for so many families. Just think about Laken Riley. President Biden finally said her name, but he refused to take responsibility for his own actions. President Biden proudly proclaims that Bidenomics is working. Goodness, y'all, bless his heart.
In terms of the delivery of the speech, where I thought Joe Biden was doing really good at hitting the right tones, Britt's speech, I felt, awkwardly oscillated a lot between like this dramatic flair to soft-spokenness to happy speech. And I just, I watch speeches. I've watched thousands of them, and I listen to people talk all the time. So I understand this idea of like enunciation and emphasis and, shifting and varying tone. But the way in which Katie Britt was doing it, I felt it was forced. Like it was weird. And I understand what she was doing. It was trying to evoke emotion. But it's like, who did it well? Sarah Sanders did it pretty well last year. Or Nikki Haley is pretty good at doing that. Or I just don't think Katie Britt, that's her thing. And, maybe I might be wrong, but it was a little more theatric in nature. And I think it didn't have to be this way. There was probably a better way of going about it. But here, take a listen to another clip by Senator Britt.
Just ask yourself, are you better off now than you were 3 years ago? There's no doubt we're at a crossroads, and it doesn't have to be this way.
So as for the substance of it, she spent a really long time criticizing Biden on the issue of the border. I think it's something that Republicans care very, very deeply about, and rightfully so, because it is a big issue. And she talked about firsthand accounts of somebody who was trafficked at the hands of the cartels. And she talked about stories relating to the issue and concerns of fentanyl. So she was really trying to strike into that fear element of a viewer, which is always the most effective way of getting to a viewer in politics. Students of politics will understand that. But she wanted to provide a counterpoint to Biden's address, which I felt kind of fell short. It seemed a little more like she was talking to her own team, as instead maybe talking about the policy points raised by President Biden. And there were even some Republicans like Charlie Kirk who expressed disappointment, saying that they wanted a more robust response. And she spoke for 18 minutes, but a lot of the 18 minutes may have not been effectively spent, is what some people said. One thing that I noted that I felt was worth talking about is the fact that she did not mention the Russian invasion of Ukraine once. And I thought it was an interesting choice. Like, in terms of the foreign policy, she talked about the Iran deal. She talked about the Afghanistan withdrawal. She talked about other things. But she didn't talk about the Ukraine conflict at all, which I took as representing two things. One, it represents a shift in the Republican argument that this is not an issue that they care about too much. It's not an important enough issue for them. And B, I feel that it's too controversial for her to discuss even with an audience of her own party. And it's representing that shift from that old Nikki Haley wing of the Republican Party, which is like not so pro-Ukraine. And okay, like I guess that's their prerogative, but I don't think that's the contrast that they're really going for. But there are a lot of Americans who do feel like Ukraine doesn't need to be an issue. Is it a majority? I don't know if it is. I don't quite think it is, but whatever. And then economic concerns. That was another big part. She criticized Biden's economic agenda. She said that hardworking families are facing inflation. She said, quote, hardworking families are struggling to make ends meet today. And it was a very kitchen table centered feeling, like kitchen table issues. And I think that was what she was going for. She kept saying, kitchen tables like mine, kitchen tables like this one, kitchen families like yours and mine, meet at kitchen tables like this one, and I think it was like a nice homey feeling to it, where she was trying to relate with the audience and say, like, this is just like your home and I'm just like you. Here's the closing remarks of Katie Britt.
And we lead it. Our future starts around kitchen tables just like this, with moms and dads just like you. And you are why I believe with every fiber of my being that despite the current state of our union, our best days are still ahead. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
And that was the State of the Union, people. I am so happy that I got to watch it, and I'm really happy that I got to join you guys today. I don't know if I'll be back next week or for a few more weeks, but we will try to make it work. We will try to be back. But yes, that was the State of the Union address. Always a very exciting time of the year, and always an exciting day on the political calendar. Always something I look forward to. And I will say that it was probably one of the more historic and one of the more unusual State of the Union addresses that we've had the opportunity to see. But I think it represents the beginning of a new shift in our political culture, where they are going to become more contentious, where they are going to become more feisty. And I don't know if I'm here for it, but I'll still be watching them. So until next year, I guess, for the next State of the Union, we'll see who's delivering that one. But thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you all next week. Go check out theshawnusshow.com. Go follow us on social media, join the email list, and keep doing what you do. We'll see you all next week.